Hello there. Welcome to episode 3 of the Stick to the Script podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Perales, and the movie we'll be talking about today is the Backrooms movie. Some general thoughts about this movie right off the bat. I've never quite seen a movie that requires kind of niche, in depth internet knowledge to understand the full scope of the story before. Now, the director of this movie, only 20 years old, and when he signed on, he was 17. And the reason that he is making a production this big, despite having no filmmaking experience before, is because he started a YouTube channel and it took what's called a creepy pasta, which is a kind of scary story made up off the internet, made a YouTube series of it, and that turned into a Hollywood movie that turned out to be the Studio A24's biggest domestic hit. Now, the great thing that I really like about this movie, as someone who watched the YouTube series and understands the lore behind it, is that you don't, well, yes, watching the YouTube series beforehand will deepen your understanding of what's going on, implications lore wise. You don't need to watch any of that to understand the emotional hook and thematic elements of this movie. It's an entirely original story set in the same universe as that series from before. That's one of the things I like about it. The other thing that I really like about this movie is the protagonist that we follow, Clark, nowhere near a typical big Hollywood movie protagonist. I would definitely go so far as to say he's not even a hero. When we first meet him in the movie, he's a down on his luck furniture salesman. You know, immediately the general audience can sympathize with him because of his financial struggles and what seems to be personal hardships in his life. However, there's a scene where he goes to therapy, and while he's talking to his therapist about his life, we kind of get a little glimpse into his true nature. As we're talking about, a scenario that happened with his ex-wife when he divorced her. He kind of snaps and loses his cool, and it's a little bit ominous in some ways. It's like his facade of just being an average guy starts to fade. As the movie goes on, we increasingly see him, what seems to be to us, lose his sanity as he discovers this alternate dimension in his furniture showroom that, it seems to be like his mind starts to unravel. He goes from being this seemingly ordinary guy to being transformed into something that lives in this dimension of endless office spaces that, resembles reality but isn't quite close. And he ends up befriending the creatures that live in there that some call monsters. We see that he ends up taking on a life of his own there after he gets stuck. The interesting thing is, though, is that the creatures in this movie, the general premise is that the Backrooms is a dimension that kind of takes human memories of places. It's almost like an echo, not only just of memories, but also of real life places that isn't quite right. It's distorted. It's like when you try to remember something and you can't get all the details right, you just remember the big pictures. That's what that is. The creatures are versions of humans that follow that same kind of rule. So in some ways, they're kind of distilled to be like dark mirrors in the fact that they're only certain aspects, like the core true aspects of a person. So the way that the movie presents it is that it's kind of like everyone has a version of themselves in the Backrooms that is, an alternate kind of, in some ways darker, other ways just kind of illogical, non-sentient beings there. And the creature that is meant to be a mirror representation of our protagonist Clark is all the creatures are deformed. However, he's the most deformed, to the point of being monstrous, because as we see earlier in the film, he has violent tendencies with anyone who comes across him. However, when he meets Clark, the real Clark, he doesn't attack him. Instead, they seem to form some sort of partnership together, and he takes him around. Now, after Clark gets lost in the back rooms, the therapist goes and attempts to find him and save him. However, when she gets there, we see that he's already, befriended these things, and he actually kidnaps her and forces her to have dinner with him and the rest of the creatures. And it's here where his true character starts to show through. He's not just an average down on your luck guy. He's a psychopath. And not just, he's crazy, he's whatever. More so than anything, he's selfish and angry. He's a very violent, prone man, prone to outbursts, and blames everyone but himself for his problems. And I think it's really fascinating to watch this scene where he's forcing the therapist to have a conversation with him, and she essentially is backed against a wall and has to use her skills with therapy to get out by kind of, in some ways, shining a light back at himself and making himself see that he really is the problem and the reason for many of the bad things in his life. And it's really interesting because that moment, then some protagonists would be like, wow, I'm not doing good. I'm not doing good things. I'm not being kind to other people. And maybe it's time to make a change. But what happens here is that he ends up feeling freed in a way, because up to this point he's just been denying his true nature, and he accepts it and in a way feels liberated. And as a result, then the creature that is a mirror of him understands now kind of that, like before it would attack everyone else but not him, because he didn't see himself as a problem or an obstacle. He only saw other people as. But now that he understands fully and embraces that he is the problem, that means that the creature also understands that he is the problem, because the creature is like him. So it ends up attacking him and killing him. And I think that it's just a really brilliant execution of the idea that, there are some things where, you know, in life, as we come across challenges, it's more about the way that we respond to them than it is what we come across. Because as we see here, he didn't choose to respond to it in a way that was helpful or good or kind in any way. And I think it was a really, really, really brilliant inversion of what is usually the hero's journey, where the hero sets out on a quest looking for something that they objectively need according to the plot, and end up discovering themselves and becoming a better person. For our protagonist Clark, what happened is when he went on this journey, he did discover himself. However, what he found out wasn't something that was gonna propel him forward in a positive way. He didn't grow positively. He didn't make any meaningful changes. In fact, his character arc was in some ways staying the same, but because it was staying the same, that's an arc in and of itself. He's accepting that he is the villain. And I thought that was a very bold move for a big movie, to have a character that has no heroic qualities at all. And I would say that of all the parts of the writing of this movie, that's definitely my favorite, was the character work on the protagonist. And that's why I like this movie. Well, the main reason why I do. That's all we have time for on today's episode. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that you don't miss any more episodes. Thank you.